Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we will try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the emerging security situation in West Asia, with a specific reference to Iran-Israel war and the way forward for India. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the concept of judicial accountability and its various aspects in Indian scenario. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026 along with a value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to the West Asian volcano, India's choices. The region of West Asia, which many American political scientists call as the Middle East, has been referred to by many international affairs experts as the region of great geopolitical churn. Now, this is because this particular region has been subjected to great chaos and conflicts in the last many decades. Recently, what has happened is that the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran is secretively enriching the uranium. As a response, Israel launched the Operation Rising Lion, and it launched a series of missiles. As a countermeasure, Iran again launched the Operation True Promise, along with a barrage of missiles. Now, this has gravely affected the security of the region because there is a possible intervention of the US also. Now, what we'll see is we look at the picture, what possible challenges it has for the region, what challenges it has for India, and what should be the way forward for India. Please remember that all these 3 players in this particular triangle, be it the Iran, be it Israel, or be it the US, all 3 are very important players for India. What you can call as strategically, they're very important for India. So we'll see, we'll try to explore the various dimensions with respect to this particular topic. Now, this is with respect to GS2 international relations. The context of the news is that Israel has said, the defense minister of Israel has said that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei must be killed. That is, the supreme leader of Iran has to be killed. Now, this tells us about the fragile security situation in this particular region. Now, whenever we talk about the region of West Asia, see, geographically you can just have a look. This is what we call as the West Asia from the Indian perspective, whereas the American political scientists call it as the Middle East. So we have different countries. We have Saudi, we have Iran, we have Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Yemen, right? Now, what you have to understand that this particular region for decades has been subject to chaos and conflicts. It has been the theater of geopolitical conflicts and chaos. Primarily, the reason has been religion. See, though these 3 religions, if we just look at the religion map of this particular region, what we'll see is that we have Sunni Muslims, we have Shias in Iran, and then we have the Jews in Israel. Now, all these 3 religions are Abrahamic religions, what you need to understand. But still, what we see is that the prime reason has been the religion-based divides, right? But that is not just the reason. We also have the sect-based divide, primarily between Iran, which is a Shia-led government. What we can say is Shia-led autocratic regime. On the other hand, we have countries like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni state, right? So this is what you have to understand. Now, see, because of this region has seen that it has developed arch rivals. For example, there was a time that we had these contestations before China basically intervened between Saudi and Iran. These were arch rivals, and still they have a lot of differences. Saudi versus Iran. Or let's take the case of Israel versus the Muslim states, or Israel versus Iran. So there are arch rivals in this particular region. When we talk about one of the most important conflicts in this region, it is that of Israel-Palestine conflict. What we have seen since the Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023. Since then, Israel has continuously launched aggressive operations in Palestine. And this has led to the killing of many innocent civilians as well, right? Now, this everything combined has led to the escalation of the security situation. And ultimately, the escalation of hostilities among different countries. Primarily right now between Israel and Iran. As I told you, that as a countermeasure, as a measure to stop the enrichment of uranium in Iran, Israel launched the Operation Rising Lion. And it basically killed a lot of military commanders, top nuclear scientists in Iran, right? Then as a countermeasure to what Israel did, Iran basically launched the Operation True Promise. Again, it has devastated many regions, including hospitals in Tel Aviv, in Israel. Thousands have been killed. Now, again, because of this, there is the effect upon the regional stability in the West Asia. So what possible ramifications or implications this particular conflict has on the region? The very first is the risk of nuclear proliferation. See, if you go back into the history, you must understand that the Americans basically came up with Iran in a particular deal, what we call as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It included the Permanent 5+1, that is Germany. But again, that was a Barack Obama-led initiative. In 2018, Donald Trump came to power. Ultimately, he backtracked. He withdrew from this particular JCPOA. Now, this again made the whole region very sensitive, because what we saw was that Iran again started to enrich its uranium. Now, the very objective of US foreign policy is to restrain those countries who are basically having this nuclear proliferation. See, the situation is that initially US started with the JCPOA. Then Trump came and he withdrew from it. Now, once it withdrew, Iran again started the enrichment. Now, this is obviously not in terms with the lines of security. So therefore, we had a lot of inspections being done by the IAEA, and it has said that there is a possibility, there are sufficient grounds to believe that there has been the continuous enrichment of uranium. Now, since this situation has gone out of the control, and we also had the talks between Iran and America, and the talks have also failed. Now what we see is that there can be the possible escalation. There can be the escalation with respect to the nuclear warfare. Now, this is a very serious security threat. Or maybe what you can see is Israel can even attack the nuclear sites in Iran. For example, we have Natanz or we have Fordo. Now, this may have a nuclear fallout, right? A meltdown. Then it is also a reason for the escalation. What you have to understand, that this region has witnessed time and again some sort of the low intensity warfare in the form of targeted assassinations. For example, you had Israel with its intelligence agency Mossad carrying out targeted assassinations of various of the nuclear scientists in Iran. Or let's say Iran attacking the American bases in Iraq when you had the killing of Qasem Soleimani, right? So there are multiple events which are going on. There are proxy wars. We have Hezbollah in Lebanon. We have Houthi rebels backed by Iran. So there are multiple areas, multiple theaters in which these proxy wars is going on. There is a possibility of escalation, and it has already escalated, right? Targeted killings, US Carter Doctrine. Now this is very important. US has a particular doctrine which is the Carter Doctrine, which says that in event of turmoil, if US interests are at stake, US can intervene in this particular region. That is militarily, right? And that's the reason Donald Trump has said that there is a possibility of US soldiers on the ground, right? So that cannot be negated. And if it turns out to be true, there can be a bigger regional fallout, because already said by Turkey, we have Erdogan, who has said that America should not intervene and Iran has all the right to defend itself. Also, what we are witnessing is that Russia and China have basically called Israel to maintain the restraint. Can you see that Russia and China now are implicitly backing Iran? That is a kind of situation we have geopolitically. Then we have threat to maritime security. Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz are one of the most important regions when we talk about the maritime trade. A lot of oil supplies, if I were to give you the data, almost 20% of the global oil supplies, they pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Do tell me that Strait of Hormuz lies between which country, right? In the comment section. Now, we already saw that once Israel started attacking the Palestinians, we had the Houthi rebels. It started attacking the commercial vessels of US and its allies in the Red Sea, right? So that is also a grave threat. Now, this overall affects the trade and energy supplies in the region, not just in the region, but also to other countries of the world. Because as we have China, as we have India, they are the major oil importers. So it also affects India's interest. Then religious or sectarian divide. See, what you have to understand, that these countries, they may have their own interests. There's no doubt about it. There would be some reality in, let's say, Iran having its nuclear enrichment. But what you have to understand, majority of these players, the political leaders, they have weaponized the religion. For example, be it Iran, a theocratic state based on the Shia principles, or let's say Israel, or let's say the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So they have weaponized religion. And this basically is not right, because this has led to persistent instability in this particular region. Many innocent children Many innocent women, they have been killed, right, for no reason. And therefore, it affects the very prospects of peace in this particular region. There have been continuous efforts by various countries to bring peace in this particular region, but that has not been possible because religion has been weaponized. Then we have the humanitarian fallout. According to UNHCR, what it says that almost 23 million people have been displaced. Now, this basically gives us the refugee crisis, which is obviously affecting the very stability of the region. Now, when we talk about the impact on India, the very first which I told you is the energy volatility. You must understand that India is an oil-dependent economy. More than 85% of our total oil supplies are dependent upon the imports. And once we are talking about the imports, you have to understand that more than 60% are imported from West Asia. So therefore, if you have these choke points, be it Strait of Hormuz or Bab el-Mandeb, if they are basically being attacked, if these regions are being choked, then definitely it would affect the supply to India, right? And therefore, the overall economy of India would be at stake. That is what you have to understand. Then we have supply chain disruptions. Again, see, please understand, if you have any of the transport of cargo going to the European countries, it would go through this particular strait, Gulf of Aden and then Red Sea and further, and then through Mediterranean to the European countries. But if you have tough situations over this particular area, or let's say in this particular area, in Gulf of Oman or Persian Gulf, definitely what would happen is that it would affect the supplies. It would affect the overall transport of these commercial shipments, right? So which is not good. It would affect the export and import. Again, when we are talking about the export and import, what we have to keep in mind, the important items such as the petrochemicals or the fertilizers. So this is very important. Also, we have the different corridors. So you must have heard about the IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Now, what you have to understand is that this particular project, the IMEC corridor, it was proposed to enhance the economic connectivity among different countries in the region so as to usher in prosperity. But this is also at stake, right? That is what you have to understand. And see, once we'll have a lot of disruptions in this particular area, let's say the cargo movement is taking place and it is being subjected to the harassment by the Houthis or any other player, right? So the insurance cost would also increase. And that would prohibitively increase the overall cost of shipments, right? And the ultimate burden would be on the consumer itself, right? Next aspect is the diaspora vulnerability. More than 9 million Indian diaspora lives in these countries of Middle East, and that too the vulnerable section. That is what you call as the blue-collared workers, right? And again, it's not just about the numbers. What you have to understand is the remittances, the amount of money which they send back. According to the Reserve Bank of India, in the year 2024, India received the remittances to the tune of almost $129 billion. Highest ever any country received, right? And again, what you have to understand, more than 40% of these remittances flow from the West Asian region to India. So therefore, this makes this particular region very important, right? Economically also. Also, if you have such type of situation, India would have to go for a lot of evacuation operations. For example, we are having Operation Sindhu, or earlier we had Operation Rahat in Yemen, right? Now, this is something which takes a toll on the overall resources of the exchequer, on the overall resources of the state. This is not something which is quite an easy task. And therefore, what we have to also understand is that the worker safety is at stake, and we'll have to go for mass evacuations. Then we have diplomatic tightrope, very, very important. Now, this is one of the very important, you can say challenge which India's foreign policy has. See, again understand, Israel and Iran are both important for India. When we talk about India's relation with Israel, what you have to understand that we have had a lot of partnerships with respect to the technological development, agriculture, counter-terror measures, right? So therefore, that partnership is very important, strategic partnership. Also, Iran is very important for India. When we talk about the connectivity projects, be it through Chabahar port and further to Central Asian countries, or be it with respect to the regional stability, what happens in Afghanistan, right? So Iran is a very important player for India. That is what you have to understand. And see, if we try to be too much close to Iran, that would also antagonize US. And US is India's very, very strong partner when we talk about the comprehensive global strategic partnership, right? So that is one of the areas which you will have to look into. And strategic relations with both India shares, in fact, with all the three, including the US. And again in varied domains, as I told you, be it connectivity, be it defense, be it, for example, the technological sharing, right, cooperation, or let's say the agriculture, very important players. Again, there's a risk of counter-terrorism cooperation. See, imagine this scenario. If continuous conflict takes place in this particular region, it would weaken different countries around the region. What we were basically trying to do is to make these states strong so that they are economically strong, they are politically strong, but because of these crises, they would lose the resources. Take, for example, Iran. Iran doesn't have enough of its resources. It is under sanctions, right? And a lot of its money is going in the defense aspect. So that has also led to the tough conditions for the people, right? So what we are trying to say is if the states become weak, it would lead to the power vacuums. And what would happen when power vacuums are created? It would be utilized by selfish geopolitical interests. Let's take the example of the Belt and Road Initiative. China may try to basically come and infuse in these particular region. Basically say to the states that I'm going to give you these many funds. Let me in. Let me come with a lot of these projects, be it infrastructure, be it power lines, be it highways. So that would definitely affect India's interest. That is what you have to understand. And again, there is also the possibility of increasing radicalization. We already saw what happened as the states weaken. The radicalization also increases. The fundamentalism also increases. As said by Samuel P. Huntington, what he calls as the clash of civilizations based upon the identity, right? So what we witnessed in 2014, the rise of the Islamic State, was primarily because of the power vacuum which was created. So you'll have to look at the whole situation in a quite comprehensive manner. What should be the key considerations for India's foreign policy? Very important. When we talk about the India's foreign policy, the very first is maintaining strategic autonomy and balancing relations. India has always stood for strategic autonomy, as also said by Dr. S. Jaishankar, when he said that India is only aligned with its national interest. India is not aligned to any power bloc, right? So we'll have to go with strategic autonomy, and we'll have to make the principal distance with all these players. We cannot take sides. That is what you have to understand. Avoid the entanglement in these power blocks. And again, what we have to focus upon is having distinct relationships with these three players. The partnership with one country should not depend upon the partnership with the other, what we call as a dehyphenation. So our partnership with US should stand on its own merit, with Iran on its own merit, and with Israel on its own merit. But India should basically focus upon the 2Ds, and we'll talk about that, what these 2Ds are. Securing the energy interests, very important. See, what happened in 2019 and 20 was that US imposed sanctions on Iran, and it basically stopped those countries buying oil from Iran. Now, this also affected India's interest because India said, all right, we'll go by what you say. But this is something which has to be rectified, right? So maybe India should ask US that this should not be done because India's interests are of prime importance for India itself, right? Diversifying the oil basket. So we cannot be totally dependent upon the West Asian countries. We'll have to diversify. Let's say Russia, or let's say some other countries, South American countries. So that should be done. Also, the strategic petroleum reserves. You must have heard about that India has come up with the strategic petroleum reserves. So we need to expand the capacity of these strategic petroleum reserves. Do read about it. So that India can have its own reserves, sufficient reserves in the time of emergency. Then protecting the sea lines of communication. Very, very important. See, what India has been saying is that it's the net security provider. I hope you have heard about the Operation Sankalp. So Operation Sankalp was basically launched to provide the security to the Indian commercial vessels in the Gulf of Oman, because we were witnessing a lot of these harassment done by a lot of these anti-social elements against the Indian vessels. So India launched Operation Sankalp. Therefore, India should come up with these initiatives so as to provide security cover to the Indian vessels flowing in this particular area. Enhance maritime coordination. Again, very important. We need to basically coordinate with the other players. Let's take the example of France. India can come and coordinate with France. France has a very strong base in Djibouti, right? So definitely India can come with other countries and have these joint operations. Diaspora and remittance protection. What we have to focus upon right now is the crisis evacuation plans. Making sure that no Indian citizen is harmed and they are timely evacuated. And what the government has also been doing through the Operation Sindhu, right? Consular support in various countries must be provided. The adjoining countries must help in this particular dimension. And timely advisories. which India has done so. That timely advisories must be given to the Indian citizens that please evacuate the country as soon as possible. Then we have preserving the strategic investments and connectivity projects. Very, very important. You must have heard about the Chabahar port, right? So Chabahar port is the one which is very close to the Gwadar port, where Chinese investments are there in Pakistan. Now, what we are trying to do is we are trying to bypass Pakistan through the development of Chabahar port. But again, understand, if this situation persists, it would lead to the compromise of India's interests. That is, if this war continues, it would basically hurt India's interests, right? So Chabahar port is the one which would provide India the access to Afghanistan and further to the Central Asian countries, right? Then we also have the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, very, very important economic connectivity project, so as to spur the economic prosperity, connecting India to that of the countries like UAE and then Saudi Arabia, and further to Israel, Haifa port, which has been devastated by the Iranian strikes, and ultimately to Greece, Piraeus port. So this is also very important. This war is affecting all these projects, right? So therefore, we need to have our focus back upon these projects. Whatever investments we have made, they should be protected, right? Then we also have the International North-South Transit Corridor, very, very important, which aims to basically link India with that of the Russia through connection with respect to the various sea routes, rail route, right? Through these countries of Iran and then further Central Asian countries. Then we have diplomatic engagement and peace advocacy. As I told you, that India must right now focus upon 2Ds. That is, there has to be dialogue and there has to be de-escalation. Because again, see, already thousands of people have been killed in this particular conflict. See, we already know that many lakhs people have been killed in Palestine. But this particular conflict has led to the killing of many people in Iran as well as Israel. So this is not good for anyone, what you have to understand, right? Leverage different forums, be it through BRICS, or be it through Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Why not? We can basically have a discussion on that platform, right? Then we have monitoring the global realignments. See, again understand, there have been in the last few years 3 very important events which have taken place. The very first event which took place was the US withdrawal from JCPOA. This basically made Iran to launch or to start its uranium enrichment. The second event which happened was basically the intervention of China with respect to making the relations between Iran and Saudi better, right? So that has been one of the very important pillars in the happenings of the foreign policy. Then the third important thing which has happened is the Abrahamic Accords, right? Which basically talked about the normalization of Israel's relations with these adjoining countries. Tell me the name of the countries which basically signed the Abrahamic Accord, right? So these 3 events have significantly affected the landscape in the Middle East, what we call as the West Asia. Now, in this tough geopolitical situation, what is really important is that different regional players, be it Saudi, be it UAE, they should come on board and make sure that there is peace in this particular region, right? Because that is really very important. Lots of innocent are being killed. And again, we can have bilateral, trilateral formats. We can have these countries coming together. For example, let's say Russia, China, or let's say India, or let's say other countries coming and basically pressurizing both these countries implicitly that they should stop the war, right? So what we are trying to say is that this particular situation, it can lead to nuclear escalation, which would not be good for any of the country around the world, right? It may lead to a nuclear fallout, a meltdown. Again, what you have to understand is that all these countries in the region are important for India. We cannot take sides. Therefore, India needs to basically play its principled distance. We need to basically emphasize upon the aspects of 2Ds, dialogue and de-escalation. And again, make sure that there is peace and again prosperity in the region. India has already invested a lot in many of these projects. So we need to make sure that these projects, they are safe and we make best use of them. That is what you have to understand. Let's look at the mains practice question. The question says, how have the growing tensions between the US, Israel and Iran affected the regional stability in West Asia? In this context, evaluate the key considerations for India's foreign policy to safeguard its interest in West Asia. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also let us know in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the very important concept of judicial accountability. Just before a few months, hordes of half-burnt currency notes were found at the official residence of the High Court Judge Justice Yashwant Verma. Therefore, at that time, the Chief Justice of India, he appointed a particular search panel And now the report of that search panel has been made public. What the report very clearly says is that the cash couldn't have been in store without the consent of Justice Verma and family. Now, this points towards the possibility of a corruption or an excess. Therefore, this particular report was forwarded to Prime Minister and ultimately he forwarded to President Draupadi Murmu. Now, what you have to understand is the government has already initiated the motion for the removal in the upcoming monsoon session, right? So possibly we'll see the removal of this particular judge, right? We'll see what happens. But what you have to understand is that we often talk about the executive accountability with respect to the kind of the functioning it has. But we seldom talk about the very important concept of judicial accountability. So what we'll try to do is we'll look at the various aspects. We'll also have a comparative analysis with respect to the UK, United Kingdom, right? Now, see, let's talk about what is the definition of judicial accountability. So basically, it refers to the responsibility of the judges to uphold judicial ethics, impartiality, transparency, and constitutional values. When we are talking about constitutional values, we are basically talking about adhering to the very aspects of constitutional morality, the very soul of the constitution, while also being answerable for the misconduct or inefficiency. That is a kind of definition of judicial accountability is all about. If you look at various aspects or various characteristics of judicial accountability, the very first is safeguarding rule of law, second, maintaining the public trust, then promoting the transparency, ensuring justice, and upholding the law. These are various tenets of judicial accountability. See, please understand, India is a case of constitutional democracy. What we are trying to say is that the construct of the state is such that we have to adhere to the constitutional principles. And in this particular construct, judiciary plays a very important role. See, whenever I'm talking about safeguarding the rights of the people, rights of various institutions, or let's say the executive or legislature is overreaching. So in order to control these organs of the state, the judiciary comes to the rescue of the people. Also, we often say that who is the guardian of the constitution? It is the Supreme Court. So therefore, in a country like India, judicial accountability becomes sine qua non. That is indispensable, very much needed. Also, in order to have this aspect of public trust in the judiciary, or let's say democratic legitimacy, see, judges are non-elected people. Therefore, they'll have to be accountable to the people. And they'll have to make sure that there is transparency and accountability in the system. If there is absence of transparency, the public trust would erode. That is what you have to understand. Now, what is the importance of judicial accountability in India? The very first is preserving the rule of law. Rule of law and not of men. Always understand. And constitutional governance. There are certain fixed boundaries within which different organs and institutions of the state operate. But if those boundaries are not adhered to, if those boundaries are not basically followed, then it would lead to the distrust among the people, right? And this would erode the public trust and it would affect the overall functioning of the state. Therefore, judicial accountability is very important aspect of a proper functioning of the state. Then we have ensuring transparency and public confidence. See, please understand, when we talk about the moral legitimacy, as I told you, judges are non-elected people. Now, if we need people to trust the judiciary, there has to be this aspect from the judiciary itself. They should be accountable to whatever they're doing. There has to be transparency in the system. If you want to create the perception of moral legitimacy, this aspect has to be ingrained in the judiciary. Trust, if you want people to trust the criminal justice system, of which the judiciary is a very important pillar, you should make sure that various aspects of transparency are followed by the judiciary. Then we have balancing judicial independence with responsibility. See, judicial independence is very important. We are not negating that. But at the same time, responsibility is also very important. If you are giving undue importance to judicial independence, and if you are not giving importance to responsibility, it might risk arbitrariness. Judiciary might basically take arbitrary decisions, which is obviously not right. Also, accountability. If there is a proper chain of accountability, then it would prevent the abuse of power by the judges. Then we have, for example, in this particular case, what we are seeing is, it is a quite clear manifestation of abuse of power, right? Preventing delay and ensuring efficiency. If there is a proper framework of accountability, it would make sure that the case management or the management in the judiciary is carried with proper framework. Then discipline, it would make sure that there is an aspect of discipline in the overall functioning, and productivity. the judiciary would be more productive, right? Then guarding against the judicial misconduct. There have been allegations of corruption, there have been allegations of nepotism, right? There have been allegations of bias. So once we have the system of accountability in place, it would make sure that there are certain standards which are followed and professional guidelines. Conduct is very important. Code of conduct is really very important, and we also read about the Bangalore principles. Now, what are the various aspects of judicial accountability in India? When we talk about the removal of the High Court and the Supreme Court judges, so when we talk about the Supreme Court judges, we have Article 124, Subclause 4, which talks about this particular aspect. Motion has to be placed before both the houses and passed by special majority. Also, when we talk about the High Court judges, we have Article 217, Subclause 1, Subclause B. Now, it provides the very framework, the basic framework. But when we talk about the statutory framework, that how the judicial inquiry would take place, how the findings would take place, we have the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968. So this is a statutory framework, whereas Article 124 Subclause 4 and Article 217 Subclause 1 Subclause B talk about the constitutional provisions. Then again, the overall process, you have to understand, the overall process with respect to the removal is not easy, right? And the Constitution prescribes that. It's quite rigid in nature. But there is an element of in-house mechanism. But this doesn't have any statutory backing. That is what you have to understand. It all depends upon the whims and fancies of the judiciary itself, of the judges. Supreme Court and High Court can basically examine different complaints with respect to the complaints referred to in cases of corruption or nepotism or lack of productivity, bad verdicts, quality of verdicts, but it lacks the statutory status. We had a particular bill which basically came to the floor of the House, that is the Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill, but it was never passed. It lapsed, right? Now, this basically bill provided for a particular framework with which we can make sure that there is judicial accountability which is maintained. Then we have Declaration of Assets and RTI. See, when we talk about there's a very important case of 2010. It was the Central Public Information Officer, Supreme Court versus Subhash Chandra Agarwal, 2010, in which the Supreme Court very clearly said that the Office of the Chief Justice of India is a public authority within the overall ambit of the Right to Information Act. But what you have to understand, that though it was declared that it is a public authority, the implementation of the RTI with respect to Supreme Court, it remains in caution. It is not being implemented properly, right? And the declaration of the assets or the other things, it is totally voluntary. It is not basically mandated that you have to declare this, right? There is no legal obligation. Then we talk about the contempt of court provisions. This is also one of the aspects which has a mark on the accountability aspect, because judiciary remains shielded with respect to these provisions of the contempt, right? It can basically punish any person, any institution with respect to if it thinks that the contempt of court has been done, right? So it shields from the criticism. And again, there's a debate which is coming, which is accountability versus free speech. See, what we're trying to say is definitely you cannot defame the court through saying that we have a free speech. But the principles of accountability must be kept, right? It should not be said that through the accountability, you are basically having the contempt of the court. That should not be said. Then we have the collegium system, very, very important. So if you just compare the collegium system, see, through the second judge's cases, we had this particular inception of the collegium system. Nowhere mentioned in the Constitution. The word consultation was said that it is nothing but the concurrence. So the word consultation was interpreted in a way by the Supreme Court that it means concurrence. You'll have to agree to what the Supreme Court says, right? So the collegium system is something which has opaqueness, right? It is non-transparent. So this is one of the aspects of accountability which is also being hurt. Appointments and transfers of the judges. It is totally in the control of the collegium system, comprises of the Chief Justice of India and the 4 senior most judges. And again, as I said, the whole system is opaque. See, the government tried to come up with the National Judicial Appointments Commission through the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act. But that was basically struck by the Supreme Court, saying that the NJAC is basically affecting the very independence of the judiciary, right? So again, there are various interpretations. There are people from the executive, there are people from the judiciary having their own opinion. But what we are trying to say is there cannot be a system which is solely dependent upon the judiciary. That would make the system a kind of a framework which lacks the accountability. So there has to be an adequate participation. There has to be a balanced approach, what we are trying to say. Performance and administrative accountability. See, when we talk about the quality of the verdicts being delivered, the timelines of the verdicts, are they being delivered on time? There is no performance evaluation. So if there is no performance evaluation, how would you assess the quality of the verdicts, or how would you assess the performance of a judge? That is one of the very serious questions. And judges are not answerable. They're not answerable for what they're doing, for the kind of verdicts they're passing. Again, a very serious concern. Now, this is very, very important aspect. Possibly a question in the mains can be there with respect to what are the different frameworks when we talk about the Indian construct and the UK. Just understand, when we talk about India's case, we value judicial independence more. The process is ingrained in the constitution itself, and it is very rigid. But when we talk about UK, we all know it follows parliamentary sovereignty. Over there, there is a ministerial responsibility. That is, the process is not as rigid, it is quite flexible. But again, the negative aspect is that there is the intervention. There is the intervention of the executive in the judicial functioning. So that is a negative aspect. But in India's case, the judiciary is completely shielded, right? Let's have a look. Legal basis, I already told you, we have Article 124, subclause 4 and Judges Enquiry Act of 68. Over here, we have the Constitutional Reforms Act of 2005 and a very, very important office, which is Judicial Conduct Investigations Office. So it basically, if there are complaints, this conducts an inquiry. And again, I'm repeating, there is a ministerial responsibility in the UK. Grounds for removal, the grounds are proved misbehavior and incapacity. Over there, misconduct or inability. Then we have removal mechanism. I told you there is a particular process prescribed by the constitution itself. Removal by the parliament. The word impeachment is only used for president, right? Not used for judges. By the parliament, both houses by special majority after the inquiry. Lord Chancellor can remove the judges of the inferior courts on the advice of the Lord Chief Justice. Higher judiciary removal is rare and requires legislative process. So again, understand the construct in the UK is that for the inferior judges, what they call as of the lower courts, they can be removed at the whims and the fancies of the ministers and the Lord Chancellors. But when we talk about the higher judges, the senior judges, in that particular case, you need a legislative backing. That is what you have to understand. Frequency of use, so only one instance, but that was also not passed in India's case. We had just the case of Justice V. Ramaswamy. Regular use of in-house reprimands, counselling, removal of lower judges. So this is a regular practice because the process is very flexible in the UK. Internal oversight, in-house procedure adopted by the Supreme Court. JCIO, Judicial Conduct Investigation Office, Office for Judicial Complaints. Public accountability, limited transparency. The transparency is not there. The process is very opaque. Delays and political overtones. That is what you have to understand. Though the process is shielded, there is complete judicial independence. But again, what we see is that there are political overtones also. Quicker disposal of complaints, public reporting and statistics published by JCIO. So we have the Judicial Conduct Investigation Office who regularly does the audit and comes with the reports so that we know what is the kind of status with respect to the workings of the judiciary in the UK. But that is not the same in India's case. That is what you have to understand. But the negative aspect in the UK is that there is too much infringement by the executive, which is not there in India's case. Now, what should be the way forward? See, if you are having in-house procedure, we have no problem with that. But codify it. It should not be based upon arbitrary principles. It should not be based upon the whims and fancies of the judges, right? Statutory clarity must be given and a timeline must be given. Timeline with respect to the disposal or the inquiry of that particular case. Then we have, let's establish the Judicial Complaints Authority or strengthen the Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill. So this was lapsed. Maybe we can again come up with a particular bill which talks about the accountability aspects in the judiciary. Very, very important. Then promote the annual disclosure and audits. Disciplinary actions with respect to, let's say, there has to be a mandatory declaration of the assets by the judges. It should not be voluntary, right? And if you are having the RTI application, it's a public authority. It's working for the people. So they should not say in the guise of judicial independence that we won't give the information. What they should be ideally doing is they should be sharing the information with respect to the working of the judiciary. Ensure clear guidelines. So you must remember that we had the 2002 Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct. So it emphasized upon the independence, impartiality, integrity, propriety, equality and competence and diligence. Do read about it. So these principles which were adopted by the judiciary must be basically incorporated, must be followed, right? Ensure clear guidelines, judicial ethics and publish performance review data. Very, very important. Have a performance audit that what kind of verdicts are being given. Are the verdicts being given on time? What is the quality of verdict which is being given, right? There has to be some form of accountability on the judges. Balance between impartiality and public accountability, special in the higher judiciary. What we see is again, you cannot always say that. Judiciary cannot always say that we have to maintain the aspects of independence and we will not allow anyone to interfere. No, it's not like that. For those aspects which can be made public, do it, right? So what we have seen in this particular case, and it accidentally came to the fore, right? There was a fire in the house and it accidentally came. So what we are seeing is that people have a trust in the judiciary. They see the judiciary as a kind of a last hope. So that accountability must be maintained. The judges are non-elected people. There cannot be any other way of accountability. Therefore, the judiciary on its own should come with these principles and make sure that the whole process is transparent. Let's have a mains practice question. Judicial accountability is essential for maintaining the legitimacy and integrity of the judiciary. Discuss the various aspects of judicial accountability in India. Also compare India's approach with that of the United Kingdom in addressing the judicial misconduct and ensuring accountability. Maybe in a tabular format, just try to compare what I told you with respect to India and the UK, right? Do try to write an answer on this. That's it for this particular topic. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the simplified section, we have the very first topic which talks about the one-stop centers. Let's look at the gist of the article. Now, we had the very heinous case of Nirbhaya in 2012. After that, we had the government appointing a particular committee under the chairmanship of Justice Usha Mehra. Now, that particular committee recommended of establishing these one-stop centers in order to basically serve as the kind of rehabilitation points for the women who are in distress, women who have suffered abuse, women who have suffered violence, right? Now, what the government did was that government came up with a particular fund, which is Nirbhaya Fund. Now, through this particular Nirbhaya Fund, the government basically constituted the one-stop centers. And here is a case study which talks about the one-stop center in Indore. So what this particular one-stop center is doing is those women who are in distress, those women who have faced violence or abuse, or those women who are having some issues, they can basically go to these one-stop centers, and these one-stop centers would provide the care and help in various dimensions. For example, the legal advice, or let's say a temporary shelter, right? So this aspect becomes very, very important when we talk about the overall women's safety. What we'll be doing today is we'll be also looking at some of the other initiatives, because possibly there have been many times questions being asked in the prelims about different initiatives taken by various ministries with respect to women's safety. So central government's one-stop center scheme meant to provide the services under one roof to support and aid women facing violence or abuse, to provide them the cushion so that they can basically have the grievance redressal mechanism. A total of 802 such centers are operational across the country, almost 1,802. In the aftermath of the Delhi 2012 Delhi gang rape case, a commission was set up under Justice Usha Mehta to inquire into the aspects of the incident, recommended the setting up of one-stop centers to assist the victims of sexual assault. Important. The center also set up the Nirbhaya Fund and announced an initial sum of 1,000 crores in 2013 for working on the women's safety. One-stop centers, a project launched in 2015, have been set up under this particular fund. Now, what this particular fund does, through the District Legal Service Authority, the center also provides legal aid for women who may not have anywhere safe to stay. The center also offers the temporary shelters for a period of 5 days at a time, a duration that can be extended by the district administration. A woman constable is stationed at the center round the clock. So it is, what you have to understand, it is providing comprehensive care, especially to the victims of abuse or sexual assault. The idea behind setting up of these centers was to ensure that women who have faced violence or abuse can approach an office like this one without fear. Because what happens is most of the women who face these assaults, they fear going to the police station. So you need to provide them the conducive environment where they can go and have their grievance redressal, in case where they're afraid to go to the police station directly. Across the country, a total of 888 one-stop centers have been approved and 802 are operational, according to the report presented by a parliamentary standing committee. The committee had expressed concern over the underutilization of the funds. So that is why, that is how you also look at the article, that what is this particular scheme, what is the particular objective of the scheme, and what are the loopholes. So it is providing the loophole also. The underutilization of the funds under the schemes like one-stop centers and women helpline, and also called the proper training of personnel deployed at the centers, and asks that the centers be staffed according to the population density of the area, right? So it has to be on the basis of the kind of density which is there in this particular area, right? Now, these are some of the very important initiatives by the government. One-stop centers, as I told you, established under the Nirbhaya Fund, provide integrated support to the women affected by violence. These centers offer medical assistance, legal aid, psychological counseling, and temporary shelter. Please understand, comprehensively dealing with the aspects of grievance redressal. Then we have the 24/7 Women Helpline. 24/7 Women Helpline number 181 provides the emergency and support services for women facing violence in both public and private spaces. Launched in 2018 under the Universalization of Women Helpline scheme, it basically offers referrals to police, hospitals, legal aid, and one-stop centers. Then we have emergency response support system. The ERSS is an integrated emergency service launched by the Government of India with a single emergency number 112 to handle all types of emergencies. Citizens can seek the help through the calls, SMS, emails, or SOS signals. Also, just have a look at the Nirbhaya Fund. So we have the anti-human trafficking units in all the districts, emergency response support system, we just read about this, integrated emergency response management system. Then we have 1023 fast track special courts, right? Women help desk, over 10,000 police station. Then we have the other aspects, for example, She Box portal launched by the Women of Women in Child Development. Sexual Harassment Electronic Box, She Box, is an initiative by the Government of India to provide single window platform for women to register the workplace sexual harassment complaints. Then Women Help Desks in police station, supported by the Nirbhaya Fund. The Women Help Desks are established in police stations to make law enforcement more accessible, responsible to women's issues. Then what you have to understand that there has been the establishment of various fast track special courts. You can just have a number. So these fast track courts for the expeditious disposal of the cases related to the women have been constituted in various states. Look at this Safe City projects. It aims to create safe, secure, and empowering environment for the women in public places to enable them to pursue all opportunities. Investigation tracking system for sexual offences, an online analytical tool launched to monitor and track timely completion of police investigations, national database of sexual offenders launched to identify repeat offenders and receive alerts. Mission Shakti, important, a scheme in mission mode aimed at strengthening the interventions for women's safety, security, and empowerment. It has two sub-schemes, Sambal and Samarthya. While the Sambal sub-scheme is for safety and security of women, the Samarthya sub-scheme is for the empowerment of women, possibility giving them more livelihood options. Cybercrime reporting portal. Then we have Meri Saheli initiative by the Indian Railways. Mahila Police Volunteers, Women and Child Development, in collaboration with Ministry of Home Affairs, has introduced Mahila Police Volunteers in different states. Special women police cells, special cells in police stations exclusively for exclusive crimes against women. So again, what we have seen many times, these missions or these schemes come and again in a match the following type questions. So again, just have a glance through all these schemes and possibly you'll be able to answer different questions. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the National Action Plan on Climate Change, NAPCC, and the Green India Mission, the renewed Green India Mission. The very objective, see, initially we had the National Action Plan on Climate Change. It had 8 sub-missions, and one of the missions was Green India Mission. Now we are having a renewed Green India Mission, again focusing upon the reforestation, especially of those areas which are vulnerable. For example, the Western Ghats or the Aravallis or the Himalayas, and making sure that there is adequate forest cover in this particular region. So this becomes important. Possibly a question in the prelims can also come. The Centre released a revised roadmap for the National Mission for Green India, also known as Green India Mission. The Green India Mission is a key component of India's national effort to combat the effects of climate change. What we are trying to say is that because of the climate change and also because of the mindless economic development, we have been uprooting different forests. So there is a need for adequate forest cover also to mitigate the ill effects of climate change, right? The core objectives of increasing and restoring the forest and green cover, the mission will address the issues of land degradation and desertification. Not just of increasing the forest cover, the tree cover, but also mitigating the ill effects of desertification and land degradation. The roadmap will also focus upon the restoration of these important landscapes, the Aravallis, Western Ghats and Himalayas, and also including the mangroves. The Green India Mission was rolled out in 2014 as one of the 8 missions under India's National Action Plan on Climate Change. The revised roadmap is for the period up to 2030. initially launched in 2014. Now we have the renewed mission till 2030. The core aim is to combat the effects of the climate change by increasing the forest and tree cover and the ecological restoration of degraded ecosystems. Because once you have degraded ecosystems, it not only affects the local population, but also the biodiversity, right? It also aims to improve the livelihoods of the communities that are dependent upon the forest produce, primarily the scheduled tribes and the forest dwellers, right? The mission specifically targeted an increase in the forest and tree cover on 5 million hectares and on improving the quality of forest cover on another 5 million hectares. Between 15-16 and 2021, the Green India Mission facilitated the tree plantation and afforestation activities across 11.22 million hectares of land through the central and state schemes. Activities under the Green India Mission are concentrated in the states based upon the mapping of ecological vulnerability. See, not all states have the same ecological vulnerability. There are certain regions which are more vulnerable, right? Maybe because of the ill effects of the climate change, maybe because of more mindless economic development, right? So that is something which has to be looked. Potential for sequestration, the process by which the plants and trees store the carbon using photosynthesis. Sequestration is the plants are consuming the carbon dioxide. So in a way, they're helping the environment, right? So that is the aspect of sequestration. Forest and land degradation and restoration potential. The revised roadmap of the Green India Mission accounts for the on-ground climate impacts and feedback received from various agencies, partner states, and scientific institutions. So there is a kind of a stakeholder approach. So it is going to work on a scientific basis, right? Central focus of the revised mission plan will be the restoration and saturation of vulnerable landscapes through regionally conducive best practices. You must have heard about the nature-based solutions, right? Where the local population have their own solutions in order to manage the local resources. So that is one of the very important aspects. This includes area and landscape scientific restoration activities, the Aravallis, Western Ghats and Indian Himalayas, and these are the areas which are focused. The Aravallis, a natural barrier against the Thar Desert, have witnessed the extensive deforestation and degradation. Once upon a time, the Aravallis were lush green, but now that green space is slowly degrading because there is the increasing spans of desertification, and this desert is now being expanded to the Aravallis also, which were quite green at one point of time. So there has to be the adequate afforestation, leading to a total loss of forest cover in 12 places. Wildlife Institute of India, the data has been given by that. These gaps have resulted in frequent sandstorms, right, and dust pollution in Delhi and NCR region. The Green India Mission interventions in Aravallis work in sync with the Aravalli Green Wall project, recently launched by the center. So that is how the information can also be used for the prelims. Know what is this particular Green Wall project. To combat the degradation and desertification in one of the world's oldest mountain ranges. What kind of mountains are Aravallis? Do mention in the comment section. Under the Green Wall project, restoration works have been planted initially across 8 lakh hectares spanning 29 districts and 4 states. This would be done in forest areas, grasslands, water systems, and their catchment areas throughout the plantations of native and locally conducive species. Not the invasive alien species, not this, but rather the local species. Then we talk about the Western Ghats, which have seen degradation, deforestation, and illegal mining. We have the mining of iron, of bauxite in this particular region, and that has taken a toll on the overall environment, has led to the sacrifice of the biodiversity. Lush green biodiversity has been sacrificed. The revised roadmap will focus upon the afforestation, groundwater recharging, and the eco-restoration. Combating desertification. A third of India's geographical area underwent land degradation during 2018-19, according to the Indian Space Research Organization Desertification and Land Degradation Atlas. India has committed to creating an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide through the additional forests and tree cover. So we'll be basically doing the reforestation, more of afforestation, so that these plants can do the sequestration of the carbon dioxide, right? The natural carbon sinks of forest, restored grasslands, wetlands, and mountain ecology will help offset the greenhouse gas emissions and act as natural sponges. Additional carbon sink of 2.29 billion tons of CO2 was created between 2005 and 21, according to the Environment Ministry. The ambitious commitment to restore 26 million hectares of degraded land by 2030, to restore large swathes of forests and degraded lands, the restoration of impaired open forest. See, this is also one of the very important areas. We have a lot of open forests which are not deemed to be forests. and adequate care is not given. For example, let's talk about the ridge area of Delhi, or we have some of the urban forests also. So adequate care is not being, for example, in Kansagachibali in Telangana, what we saw, that there was the uprooting of these trees, or let's say we had the RA park, RA forest in Mumbai. So adequate care has to be given to these urban forests also. Cost of effective and high impact CO2 sequestration based upon the Forest Survey of India estimates. According to the Forest Survey of India, this approach alone has the potential to sequester 1.89 billion tons of CO2 over approximately 15 million hectares. The GIM can help India expand its forests and tree cover by almost 24.7 million hectares, enough to achieve carbon sink of 3.39 billion tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. You need not to again focus too much upon the data. See, again, one thing which I want to clarify over here is I went through the comments and there was a kind of an obsession for the data. See, a good answer in the mains, what it really requires is proper argument, right? So a proper argument supported by data is what is needed, not the bombardment of data, right? The examiner is not just looking for data. The examiner is looking for solid arguments supported by data. And see, it is not humanly possible to memorize all the data points. So that's the reason that I always try not to bombard with you a lot of data points. So that is what you have to understand, because ultimately what matters in the mains examination is that how well your argument is. Then you support it by data, not like just filling the answer sheet with the data itself. I hope it's clear, right? Let's also talk about the other aspects. So we have the National Action Plan on Climate Change. The National Action Plan on Climate Change was released by the Prime Minister in 2008. It outlines a national strategy that aims to enable the country to adapt the climate change and enhance the ecological sustainability of India's developmental path. Way back in 2008, when we were basically getting more aware with respect to the ill effects of climate change. So this was a comprehensive mission made to make sure that we deal with the ill effects of climate change through various approaches, be it adaptation and also mitigation. It stresses that maintaining high growth rate is essential for increasing the living standards of the vast majority of the people of India and reducing their vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. So it gives a balance. It's saying that though economic progress is very, very important, but at the same time, sustainability is also very important. So we'll have to come up with those strategies which balance these two imperatives, right? There are 8 national missions which form the core of National Action Plan. So we have National Solar Mission, National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency, right? National Mission on Sustainable Habitat, National Water Mission, Mission for Sustaining the Himalayan Ecosystem, Mission for Green India. Now we are having a renewed this Green India mission. National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, making agriculture more resilient with respect to the ill effects of climate change. National Mission on Strategic Knowledge for Climate Change. So you can just have a look. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the National Education Policy. Now, the gist of the article is that we have the Education Minister giving due credit to the National Education Policy for the improvement seen in the India's universities ranking in the global ranking framework. Now, what you have to understand that National Education Policy has been in news not for good reasons, primarily because of the contestations, the debates the southern Indian states are having with respect to the language policy in the National Education Policy. The very objective, according to the government, of the National Education Policy is to comprehensively reform the education scenario, be it the primary education, the secondary education, the senior secondary, and including the higher education. So we will see what are the various components of the National Education Policy, right? Now, Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan credited the National Education Policy for 5-fold jump in the number of Indian institutions from 11 in 2014 to 54 now in the QS World University 2026 rankings. The NAP had changed the country's education landscape with its emphasis on research and innovation. The NAP has encouraged multidisciplinary, skill-based and employment-oriented education system. Now, this is according to the government. What the government is saying that we have had a transformational national education policy because it has incorporated all these aspects. With the NAP, we are integrating India's heritage and knowledge traditions into the modern education and fostering a sense of rootedness and pride in our culture. Now, see, this becomes important. I have taken this from the PIB, and again, that information, what are the various features of the characteristics of National Education Policy, has been announced on 29th July 2020. The National Education Policy proposes various reforms in the school education as well as higher education, including technical education. So it's not just restricted to the school education, rather it looks at the education domain in a very comprehensive manner. A number of action points activities for the implementation of the school education as well as higher education are mentioned in the National Education Policy. The very first is ensuring the universal access at all levels of schooling from pre-primary to the grade 12. That is what the objective is. Ensuring quality early childhood care and education. ECCE, very important. So NCERT has been given the responsibility to form the curriculum with respect to early childhood care and education. Now, the next aspect is, right now we are having a framework of 10+2 system. It is now being transitioned to 5+3+3+4 system, right? So, adequate emphasis has to be given at different stages of development of the children. No hard separations between arts and sciences. So, they are basically giving more importance to liberal sciences, between curricular and extracurricular activities, between vocational and academic streams. Establishing national mission on foundational literacy and numeracy. Very important, because according to Pratham, what we have seen is that the learning outcomes are not good, right? So we have to focus upon the learning outcomes of the children, right? Then we have emphasis on promoting the multilingualism and Indian languages, making sure that the children at the primary stage are taught in their mother tongue so that they can have proper cognitive development and infusion of knowledge. Assessment reforms, board examinations on up to 2 occasions during any given school year. Setting up of the National Assessment Center, Parak. This is important because the kind of assessment we have in India, that is totally based upon the marks. So in order to have a more holistic framework with respect to the assessment, okay, we have this particular Parak system. Equitable and inclusive education, having the focus upon the socially and economically disadvantaged groups, separate gender inclusion fund and special education zones to focus upon the disadvantaged regions, robust and transparent process for the recruitment of teachers and merit-based performance. See, because sometimes you can have these characteristics or the features of the NEP, you can write in a flowchart form of way in the mains examination, or possibly they can be questioned in the prelims. That's the reason I have given this. Ensuring the availability of all the resources through the school complexes. So we have setting up of the State School Standards Authority, making sure that all the parameters are followed. Exposure of vocational education in school. Increasing the gross enrollment ratio in higher education to 50%. That is a target. In higher education to 50%. Holistic and multidisciplinary education with multiple entry-exit. This is very important in order to have that autonomy. National Test Agency to offer common entrance exam, establishment of academic bank of credit, setting up of multidisciplinary education and research universities, MIRUs, setting up of the National Research Foundation to have a proper source, to have a proper path for the investments in the research domain. Light but tight regulations, single overarching umbrella body for the promotion of higher education sector, including teacher education, excluding medical and legal education. Then we have the expansion of open and distance learning so as to make the education accessible to all the sections of the society. Internationalization of education, very, very important, so as to make our universities and institutes open to other universities and institutes around the world. Professional education will be an integral part of the higher education system. Teacher education, 4-year integrated, stage-specific, subject-specific Bachelor of Education. Establishing a national mission for mentoring. Creation of autonomous body, that is the National Education Technology Forum, to provide platform for free exchange of ideas on the use of technology in the education domain. Achieving 100% youth and adult literacy. Multiple mechanisms with checks and balance will combat and stop the commercialization of the higher education. All education institutions will be held to similar standards of audit and disclosure so that there is a proper scrutiny of how these education institutions are basically functioning. The center and the states will work together to increase the public investments in education to reach up to 6% of GDP. So that is the overall target with respect to the expenditure on the education. Strengthening the Central Advisory Board of Education to ensure the coordination to bring overall focus on quality education. NAB 2020 aims to increase the gross enrollment ratio of 100% in preschool to secondary level by 2030, whereas gross enrollment ratio in the higher education, including the vocational education, from 26.3% in 2018 to 50% by 2035. These targets are important. Possibly a question in the prelims can come. Let's go to the next topic. Now, coming to the next topic, here's a very good initiative or a project from Kerala, which is Kudambashree. Now, the very objective of Kudambashree is to provide the empowerment to the women. through various livelihood options. Now it is based upon what we call as the neighborhood groups. You must have heard about the self-help groups. So different women come together, they contribute, and again, it basically makes sure that they save a money, and then they have the options to invest in a particular livelihood option. And this ultimately empowers the women. So this, what has happened in this particular article is that we have the Kudambashree, and it has opened a particular cafe in Delhi itself. So this talks about the various employment or livelihood opportunities which can be given to the women through these initiatives. So these initiatives must be given impetus and must be given the adequate resources, right? Kudambashree, a project launched by the government of Kerala in 98 for poverty eradication and women empowerment, translates to prosperity of the family. Amidst the food stall of different states, the Amar Jawan Jyoti Road, the Cafe Kudambashree tells its own story of women empowerment, financial independence, and authentic Kerala cuisine, right? So what is Kudambashree? So we have in Malayalam, it means prosperity of the family. It was set up by the government of Kerala. The very objective is poverty eradication and empowerment of women. Implementing agency is SPEM, that is the State Poverty Eradication Mission, to eradicate the absolute poverty in 10 years and the other objectives. It will be done under the leadership of local governments. This is very important. You are not having a top-down approach. We are having a kind of a bottom-up approach, where the local authorities are given the overall authority with respect to the management of the program. Neighborhood groups would also, we have the self-help groups at the lowest level, then we have the area development societies at the middle level, and then we have the community development societies at the local government level. So basically they contribute the money, they save, and ultimately use it for their own livelihood generation. Kudambashree was launched against the 1996 People's Plan campaign, functions in accordance with the local self-government funded by the Union government and NABARD. It was set up in 1997 by a 3-member task force appointed by the Kerala government. So again, this can be given as a possible example when you're talking about the people's participation, especially at the grassroots level, in order to promote the livelihood generation, focus upon creating livelihood opportunities. So this is a very important initiative, and it basically empowers the women and offers different livelihood opportunities. Let's go to the next topic. Now coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to a particular article which has been published in the Indian Express. What it says is that though the government and the industry is very positive about expanding the green hydrogen, there are issues with respect to the demand, and it is primarily because of the geopolitical turmoil which we are witnessing. So first of all, what is green hydrogen? Hydrogen which is produced using renewable energy, that is known as green hydrogen. So the green hydrogen is essentially produced by splitting the water into oxygen and hydrogen atoms using electrolyzers. Powered by the renewable energy, can replace the coal and natural gas in hard to abate sectors like steel, cement, refineries. It is also a key feedstock for green ammonia made by combining hydrogen with nitrogen. Green ammonia has applications such as low carbon fertilizer and fuel for shipping. Look at this. We have the renewable energy generation, getting electricity to an electrolyzer, hydrogen electrolyzer, and ultimately you have the distribution and storage, and ultimately we have the net zero emissions. There are other types of hydrogen also. Let's have a discussion. First, as I discussed, the green hydrogen, it is basically produced by electrolysis of water using electricity from renewable sources like wind or solar. Zero carbon dioxide emissions are produced. Then we have blue. What is blue hydrogen? Hydrogen produced from fossil fuels where CO2 is captured and either stored or repurposed. So whatever CO2 is being emitted, you are storing it. That is blue. Then we have gray, hydrogen extracted from natural gas using steam methane reforming. This is the most common form of hydrogen production in the world today. So in this, you have the emission in the environment itself. Then we have purple, pink, hydrogen produced by electrolysis using nuclear power. Turquoise, hydrogen produced by thermal splitting of methane. Instead of CO2, solid carbon is produced. Then we have hydrogen extracted from coal using gasification. Yellow, hydrogen produced by electrolysis using grid electricity from various sources. Either it can be renewable or fossil fuels. Hydrogen produced as a byproduct of industrial processes also refers to hydrogen occurring in its rare natural form. So these are various types. Possibly a question in the prelims can also come. So here we come at the end of the discussion. I hope you really liked it. Thank you and all the very best. Thank you.